Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. My name, of course, is Orbital, and today we have something incredibly special. We are incredibly blessed to be with the founder of the Democracy franchise, Cliffski. Cliff, how are you doing, man? I'm so glad that you're here. That's absolutely amazing.
I am doing okay, although I'm releasing a game tomorrow, so I'm nervous about it, obviously.
I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fantastic. And you've kindly agreed to answer a couple of questions that I have about the game and about the franchise and stuff. And I think it's going to be really exciting. I really do.
Cool.
So for somebody who has never ever played Democracy before, any of the games, how would you describe it?
It's kind of like President Tycoon, I guess. Um, it's it's a very hard game to describe because it doesn't look like a normal game. It, it's
Yeah.
it's very weird because it seems like just a lot of connected icons, like a super complicated flowchart, really. Uh, which sounds awful, but in practice, it does work. So it's basically a game where you are the president or prime minister of a country, and the the idea is not actually just to keep winning elections, which is how you keep playing, but the idea is it's kind of a sandbox for your own opinions. So, you can try and transform a country to be really left wing or right wing or really religious or anti religious or whatever over time. And the sort of game element of it is whether or not you can do that and still keep getting elected.
hmm hmm And going sort of back to the roots of it, how did you come up for this idea of this this spreadsheet democracy game?
The real answer is so weird. I actually there? Yeah, I think I was working at Linehead.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think I was actually there at the time. Yeah, and I was reading a book by a guy called Steve Grant, who is the guy who made the Creatures games, which are very old now. But he wrote a book about his experiments in trying to make a robot chimpanzee. um,
Okay.
it sounds completely random, doesn't it? And anyway, in that book, from a programmer's point of view, there's a very good kind of discussion of how neural networks are programmed and how they work and how the brain works. And in some sort of like random moment of inspiration, reading that, I thought, you could model economics and politics like that. Because I'm a bit of a like politics geek, and
Yeah.
I went to the London School of Economics and studied economics, so I'm interested in all that anyway.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and from that sort of like I started coding a neural network that modeled politics and economics and society, and turned it into a game. And that
Wow.
was the original one, which sort of did okay, um, but the graphics were horrendous. And so then I redid it. It's Democracy 2, which was actually quite successful.
Uh-huh.
And then still I wasn't quite happy with it. And then when I did Democracy 3, when that was released on Steam, that did very well indeed.
Yeah. That I mean, it's fantastic. And Democracy 3 is obviously what the current game that you're going to be releasing, and that's Democracy 3 Africa.
Mm.
And this is the game that is the African variant of that hugely successful Democracy 3 game. Why did you decide that Africa why did you decide that Africa was going to be the setting of this brand new democracy game?
Well, I had various ideas. The idea that I had that everyone wants me to do and says, no, you should have done that, but doesn't actually work as a game, was kind of a almost like a sort of Lord of the Rings or like Game of Thrones style democracy game.
Oh man,
Yeah,
that'd be great.
yeah, exactly. Everyone says that, but and I did some work on this, but it didn't really work as a game because the reason Democracy 3 works is you only need a tutorial to tell you how the game works. Everything else you know that socialists like certain things, you know that commuters want certain things, that motorists don't like car tax. You know all of this stuff. Everybody in society knows what all these voter groups want. So when I started designing the like fantasy version, it was, what do people want? So like elves want cheaper arrows. I mean, like
Yeah.
what else? What
Yeah,
do
yeah. Yeah.
exactly what do dwarves think about
Yeah.
income tax? You know what I mean? It's like nobody knows. So it was actually really awkward. I mean, you could make up stuff, but
Yeah.
then the
Yeah.
player has to learn it all.
Hmm.
So I thought, maybe I'll come around to that. I don't know. But the other idea was Africa,
Yeah.
and Africa is just different politically, and massively different economically.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when you play the normal Democracy 3 game, you take a lot of stuff for granted. So you take the fact that everyone can like afford food and has clean water and like a power connection to their home. That's all taken for granted. There's no child labor policy because what the hell. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and in the original game, like women aren't even a separate group because we don't have perfect gender equality in the developed world, but it's so much better than it is in Africa. So they don't have to be represented. Whereas if you're modeling Africa, it's a really, women's rights are a really big deal. Child labor is a real thing. And foreign aid, which in Democracy 3 is something that costs you money. Obviously, in Democracy 3 Africa, a lot of countries are getting aid from other countries. So you have to have good relationships with those countries. So I just thought it would be more interesting because it's much harder. The challenges are very different, and it kind of turns a lot of your Democracy 3 strategies upside down. For example, a lot of these countries start with no liberals at all. They start very religious and conservative.
Hmm.
So I find if I just try and play it like Democracy 3, I get voted out or assassinated pretty quickly.
Yeah.
You kind of have to go along. You have to gradually have change in these societies. You can't just suddenly declare, equality for women and legalize abortion and all these kind of things because there's a lot of entrenched kind of religious and conservative views. So it's an interesting setting. I thought as a player, I didn't really think of it as a sort of business decision because everyone keeps telling me nobody's going to care. No, it's Africa. Nobody's going to care. But I would like that to be wrong.
Yeah, that's a really encouraging viewpoint, and that sort of leads into the next question, which you've already half described, I guess. But what are some of the major differences between the last iteration of the game and then this current iteration of the game, so to speak? Like, what's the biggest differences?
Well, one of the most interesting ones I think is that the whole concept of democracy is now in the game. So in the original game, it was assumed you lived in a democratic society, and you couldn't really do much about that. We did a little bit with the extremism expansion, but in Democracy 3 Africa, it actually models democracy. So, for example, you may start with no freedom of the press in certain countries, and if you have a lot of anti-democratic things like detention without trial and torture and stuff like that, you have a lot of angry people that don't like that, which is like understandable. But you also have a lot more political capital, which is the kind of freedom to change stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go both ways in the game. This is what's interesting. You can either give in to the kind of liberal demands for democracy and make people happy and give up some power, or you can basically just give all the police guns and you send them out onto the streets and just tell people they got to deal with it and kind of like try and crush opposition. So it kind of depends how you want to play. And also you can go the other way. So you can start with a fairly sort of, modern liberal country like Mauritius, and you can push it into a religious theocracy where there's no freedom of press, there's no judicial independence or anything like that. So you can actually kind of push towards dictatorship in Democracy 3 Africa, which you couldn't do at all. We didn't model that in the original
Yeah.
game.
Yeah, I mean, also corruption as well. I mean, that's a hugely, different ball game from the original democracies. You're dealing with corrupt people in Africa.
Yeah, we have corruption, and we have what is sort of very politically correctly called what is it that it's the informal sector.
Oh yeah, the black market.
Yeah, it's the black market, isn't it? But
Yeah.
I for whatever reason, it's now called the informal sector. So yeah, we have that, and we have corruption, and I find the issue of child labor fascinating, because sort of naturally, as a Western citizen, I think obviously we should ban child labor,
Yeah.
but it's not that simple, because for a lot of kind of like small sort of rural communities where the kids go out into the field and work on the farm, to us that's child labor, but to them that's kind of the business model.
Yeah, that's livelihood. Yeah.
Yeah, with a certain level of poverty and a certain lack of education and technology and therefore skilled jobs, that's how society works. So
Yeah.
it's actually unpopular in the game at certain points, depending on everything else. It is unpopular to do away with child labor, because
Yeah.
rural communities and the poor will think, well, you're hitting me in the pocket there. Now, obviously, you can compensate. You can. There's all sorts of anti-poverty measures that you can put in that compensate, but you have to have both sides of the coin. You effectively have to pay people to stop them sending their kids into the field, because their whole. Not in all African countries, obviously. There's a whole sort of range that we model, but we were very careful not to take a Western view of it. And to just sort of go, obviously child labour is awful, and obviously they all want to do away with it, because that's not necessarily the case. In the long term, obviously it is. But I find issues like that interesting, because they kind of make us squirm a bit.
Yeah, it makes you feel uncomfortable, doesn't it? And the fact that the people are actually in favor of it because they need it for their livelihood. It's an uncomfortable feeling. Yeah, without a doubt.
Also, the whole issue of a lot of the policies in there that you would tend to want to do for gender equality at some point are very unpopular if you have a very religious and very conservative country. And the interesting dilemma, I think, is the fact that it doesn't matter how moral and ethical you are, you will achieve nothing if you're not in power. So you have to make these really interesting compromises, saying, sorry, women, but we're still not going to have any family planning until I get re-elected, because I'm busy doing other stuff, and I don't want to upset the Conservatives because I need their votes. That's a really awkward decision to make, but it's a necessary decision, and you see politicians kind of trying to walk a tightrope all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So after you talked about the calmness of Western democracy, was there an appeal in running this simulation in much more turbulent countries?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some people complain that Democracy 3 is a bit easy because they kind of learn a winning strategy. I don't think it's just about that. I mean, I can win every country in Democracy 3 very easily, but the question is to look at your country and go, yeah, you got re-elected, but what have you actually achieved? What state is the country in, and can you get re-elected again and again and again? So I guess for some people that find it too easy and just want to win and don't care, they will find Democracy 3 Africa interesting because they don't know how to beat this one. It's different. You have to learn about different stuff. You have to learn about corruption and what corruption affects. You also have to care about, for example, foreign relations. Because they may be giving you aid. So, for example, you have this whole thing with if you have a lot of crime and you have a lot of terrorism, you might legalize some use of torture, for example, which again is very uncomfortable. If you do that, you will upset the foreign governments that are sending you aid, and then you get into this double ethical quandary of kind of like, okay, well, I better stop torturing so I get more aid, and kind of like, is that the only reason, you know? But I do find stuff like that interesting, and yeah, the ability to kind of keep the country together when there's so many forces trying to tear it apart. I think it's interesting. And again, some of the countries are really hard. Like Zambia is really hard,
Yeah.
massively hard. Mauritius is easy. South Africa's probably is kind of in the middle. So there's a bit of sort of challenge, and there's a difficulty slider anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
hopefully there's like a level of challenge that everyone will like.
Yeah. I mean, from what I've played of it, I can immediately tell that it is much more difficult than Democracy 3 was. much much more difficult. And also, I think something else that makes it a little bit more difficult is the fact that you've got all of these indirect modifiers, so to speak. Is you've got a lot more bubbles that are representative of how other bubbles are doing, and that
Yeah.
changes the whole dynamic a lot as well. Because
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the thing is, like, during the development of the original game, we'd come up with various things, various techniques we wanted in there for one thing to affect another thing, but to skew that by yet another thing. And so the internal modeling got more and more complex as we went through it. But when we started on this one, all of those sort of tricks that we learned from adding stuff to Democracy 3 were all in there at the start. So yeah, there's some fairly complex stuff. There's some stuff that's hidden from you, to do with corruption, for example, and there's some other quite subtle effects in there, like freedom of the press. This isn't documented anywhere, but freedom of the press at a very, very high level, right at the top, will reduce your security. And now you don't see
wow,
security anywhere, but it is modeled in terms of whether or not terrorist attacks work. And you can see a kind of rough approximation of it on the like pressure group and terrorist screen. So the idea being that, like, if you really let the press broadcast anything and cover anything, then that includes where government ministers are, and there's kind of no secrets. And it also includes broadcasting like what the Secret Service is up to and stuff like that. And we've had stuff like this in the UK where the press take long lens pictures of cabinet briefings as they walk into number 10, and then they blow them up, and it's like,
yeah.
this is what the government's doing. And like, that's press freedom, but it can be a bit dodgy. So I like that idea that you consider press freedom to be a good thing, but at the extreme level of almost anything, interesting weird side effects kind of do crop up.
Wow. I mean, you heard it here first, folks. You heard it here first. I mean, that's why you get assassinated in the late game, because of your press freedom. So one of the criticisms of the original Democracy 3, the first Democracy 3, is that there's something that could be referred to as, a liberal bias that is underlying, I suppose. And it's very, very hard to please capitalists. Was this underlying tone intentional at all?
Not at all. It's quite funny. My own politics are very complicated. But I would probably describe myself as a kind of liberal capitalist. I run a business, So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I trade on the stock market, so I'm definitely a capitalist. So I find it quite funny when people say the whole game's like a socialist liberal plot or something, and I think it really isn't. There is no intentional bias in the game at all. A lot of people do see biases in it, and there definitely are, because we are all biased by our own experience. I'm a middle class guy from England, and that biases me massively, however much research I do. I would probably accept that it is harder to keep capitalists. I think it's harder to keep capitalists happy than it is to keep socialists happy in the game, definitely. I think in one term it's easier to win as a socialist. I think if you're talking 2 or 3 terms when you're going through a global economic downturn, I think it does tip the other way. In other words, it's very easy to get into debt and use money to keep the socialists happy, but economically it's not so easy in the long run. And I think what a lot of people do is they play the game as a socialist, and they win an election and they think it's biased, but you need to actually keep going because you can just be lucky with the global economy as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's horrendously biased. There is a happy capitalists mod for it, which someone did, which I think skews it the other way. So, and that's what I like about the mods. There's so many mods that no matter what you think is wrong with the game, it's really easy to mod. You can just do it with Excel. Someone out there has changed it in a way that you will like. So hopefully that sort of counteracts any sort of bias I have. I don't know. But people who know me really well think it's hilarious that everyone thinks I'm a socialist because of the game.
So do people like see it from different angles, and do some people complain that it's it's too easy to let the socialists be unhappy?
Yeah. Oh, big time.
So you get it from all angles.
Yes.
It's biased against socialists, biased against liberals, biased against capitalists.
Yeah, I do. It was described. There was a thread on the Steam forums recently saying, how much did the Democratic Party pay for this blatant PR stuff? It's like, I'm not even American. And it's done by So I've been accused of everything, misrepresenting everyone and everything. Which I think is good because hopefully, if I wasn't getting it from a particular side, I'd think that it was probably more biased.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like Reddit, isn't it? I mean, you go in there with an opinion, and like nobody wants to like accept anyone else's opinion could be valid. So it's a game that makes everyone furious, I think.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm just biased because I've been assassinated by the Battenberg group so many times that I don't even want to talk about it. It is just ridiculous.
Well, you need, what you need to do, the trick to it, actually. I shouldn't say this because it kind of involves an add-on pack, which sounds like I'm promoting it. But you can do it without this. But what you need to do is you need to change society before you upset people. So what you need to do is you need to reduce the number of capitalists, because the terrorist groups in the game are not kind of like random. They are actually pulled from actual voters in the game. So individual voters are they become radical, and then you get a terrorist attack. So the less capitalists you have, the less of that problem you will have. Yeah. So what you need to do is you kind of like need to build up acceptance of socialism before you go in there and stick on all those stuff that really annoy them. You can do that probably better with the social engineering stuff. But if ever you get assassinated, you've moved too quickly. You change too quickly.
Yeah. Actually, that leads into the next question. So about policies, how do you decide what groups a policy will affect, and how do you adjust that to make it balanced?
We just play it a lot, like a real lot, and a bunch of us play it, and then we'll kind of like argue. Like me and the designer for Democracy 3 Africa, who's Jeff Sheen. He will model something, and I'll play it, and I'll say, well, I don't think that. I don't think this group will be upset by that. And normally what happens then, because he's Mr. Statistics, is he comes back with, well, here's some peer-reviewed studies that show. And I think, oh, God, there's no point, I've lost this one, haven't I?
I mean, you're asking for it. You created a democracy spreadsheet simulator. I mean,
yeah.
What do you expect?
Yeah. There is that. I mean, some of it is kind of a matter of opinion. We did have, for example, a sort of debate in this about child benefit and childcare provision, because suddenly women is a group. So it was put forward, I think, by me that women should be happy, and this is sexist. Women should be happy if they get free childcare, and then it was, Jeff called me up on it and said, well, why women? That's a sexist point of view. So anyway, it is coded in the game that depending on the level of gender equality, the extent to which women are happy about childcare is skewed. So in a perfectly equal society, it's just parents as a group that are happy, and in a completely unequal society, it's the women who are happy. So we had to there's some hideously complicated equation in there that like changes that, which is interesting because I'm sure it will get reported as a bug, because some people will sort of say, I did this and it made women happy, and then in another game I did it and they weren't happy at all. And it's like, yeah, that depends on this other thing. It's really hard to display that to the player, but it is modeled in there.
Yeah, and that just goes back to just a whole bunch of things affecting different bubbles. There's a whole lot of more factors that tie into each voter's happiness, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of effects, and some of them are quite gradual. Like urbanization is quite gradual.
Yeah.
So if it goes too quickly, you get like mass urbanization and overcrowding and stuff like that. But this is stuff that's going on kind of like in the background as a result of your other policies that you tend not to notice.
Mm-hmm. And that sort of shows that there's a whole bunch of new events. There's a whole bunch of different red bubbles, a bunch of different green bubbles. I mean, I've put about 10 hours into the pre-release version that you very kindly given me, and already there is far, far, far more than there was in Democracy 3.
Yeah, there is a lot of stuff, and there's some quite rare stuff in there. It was kind of easier to add stuff this time, I guess, because the basic engine for the game is done, so there was a lot more time to go into put in new dilemmas and new events. So hopefully people will continue to see things that they kind of like haven't seen, despite the fact that they played for a long time. Yeah, I'm just looking at the list of them now, and yeah, there's loads.
There is. I haven't even discovered. I'm on the tip of the iceberg. I haven't discovered any of them, but I'm really looking forward to it. And there are some policies that are just good policies that you should just implement. And I don't know. I'm a little bit conflicted about how I feel about these policies, because in theory, they are really, really good, and how they make people feel is probably pretty representative of what they are in the real world. Like free school meals makes everybody happy, and it reduces poverty, and it's just objectively a great policy. So are these policies just overpowered, or is there something else going on behind the scenes there?
Well, actually, free school meals does. Yeah, I'm just looking at it now. No, it doesn't have any actual technical downsides, but a policy like that costs money.
Apart from the costs, yeah.
So there is the cost, and there's also the implementation time of passing it. But I think such policies do exist. I mean, unless you run a business. No, I mean, unless you run like your takeaway near a school. I mean, what is the downside other than cost in a policy like that? It may be slightly overpowered. What you have to remember is that because there are thousands of government policies and thousands of things that go on, the game is not directly mapping individual things. It's kind of representative. So, for example, one of the situations which you've probably seen is like the asthma epidemic.
Yeah.
And we're not really saying there's an asthma epidemic. We're saying there are various health-related complications resulting from pollution. All wrapped up, and we picked one, an asthma epidemic. So the free school meals thing is kind of like not just that. It would be like sort of intervention with especially poor and troubled families, stuff like that. Which generally people are not against. Generally people like it, but of course it costs money, and don't discount the fact that all these policy costs do add up. You've got to pay for it somehow.
Absolutely. And for the final question, I thought I'd ask you a little bit of an interesting one. Democracy 3 Africa is a complex game, as is Democracy 3. How accurate do you think the games would be at predicting an election?
Loads of people have used the game. Loads of like journalists have played it as Trump or whatever. I don't think it's accurate at all. Although I also haven't even announced this yet, but I am going to be doing an add-on that covers electioneering. I don't think it would be accurate right now at all because it assumes rational voters. So, for example, nobody in Democracy 3 thinks, I'm going to vote for this government because they're incredibly liberal, when in fact they're not, but they're very good at spinning what they do as liberal.
Yeah.
So all the voters in Democracy 3 have perfect knowledge about every government policy, what it does, how much it's cost, the effects on them. And,
Yeah.
no one in there it's just, oh, I'd vote this way because, like, my brother said to vote that way and, he's clever. Or, like, I'm not going to vote for that person because, like, they've got a beard and I think you can't trust people with beards. There's all these stupid reasons
Yeah.
in the real world. Or, like, I don't like the school that he went to or whatever. There's all these kind of, like, superficial reasons. Which we don't model. It's a very idealistic game because it's basically the sort of university debating society game where people argue about the core principles. Should income tax be high? Should we have inheritance tax? Should the government prevent you doing this or that? So it is a perfectly informed electorate. And I think especially looking at the US elections now, that is not a perfectly informed electorate.
Yeah.
That is not an election campaign about policy. It is about personality and bluster and PR, which is obviously very regrettable. So I don't think Democracy 3 is accurate in that sense at all. I wish it was. I wish elections were like Democracy 3, but they're sadly not.
And you plan on sort of changing that and making it more representative, I suppose, of reality, or is it going to stay like this?
No, well, I have given in, and I am going to. It's mostly done actually, but I've been so busy with other stuff. Yeah, we are going to have like an electioneering add-on that covers a lot of stuff like that, like giving speeches and like PR spin events and stuff like that. So we are going to do that, but I like the idea that it's an add-on because, like, I imagine some people really like the game as it is, without all that. So I like the idea you can just press a button and go, yeah, I'm going to play with all the like electioneering kind of bullshit, basically, or not have it. So yeah, I'm still working on that, probably later this year.
Oh, such juicy gossip.
Yeah,
My
I haven't
goodness.
told anyone. So yeah, this is
It's okay. It's a random little 3,000 subscriber
Yeah,
channel on the internet. I don't think it's probably not going to draw the headlines of the Telegraph and the Sun and whatnot. But
oh well, that's a pity.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
That's no problem.
It's been absolutely fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Democracy 3 Africa is out today. Go check it out. It is an absolutely fantastic game, and I would thoroughly recommend it. My name's Innovative Potato. His name's been Cliffski. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time, folks. Bye.